Oh, Mike Crowley. Nice to meet you. Finally, we've got some mutual friends who thought that we should talk. I don't know if you know, but I've published a book called Yoga and Plant Medicine, and I made a short film on the shamanic roots of yoga, tracing the early use of Soma up through the tantric period and the development of Hatha Yoga. So some of our mutual friends in the psychedelic and Buddhist world thought we should get together and have a conversation. So I'm really happy that you could make it.
Right, I've seen the film. I haven't run across the book yet.
Yeah, well, I'll send you a copy.
Oh,
Um,
great.
yeah, well, I just thought it would be helpful for anyone in my audience who doesn't know of your work or know of you, if you could just start by talking a little bit about how you got introduced to Buddhism and psychedelics. And I'm always interested in like what came first for you.
Well, they both came about the same time, actually. I think Buddhism um, was first. I'm just trying to remember now. Um, Buddhism came first by a shorthand, I think.
Hmm.
I um, as a teenager, I was very active in political groups, and I was very much involved with the campaign for nuclear disarmament. And um, there was a week of um, lectures and workshops in my school. Actually, it was in a local school, not actually mine. And we were all given one day to go, sort of spread out throughout the week. And it was of great interest to me. There were talks um, on nuclear weapons and colonialism and all kinds of left-wing stuff that I was eager to get my teeth set into on every day except Tuesday. And of course, I was assigned Tuesday. There was nothing of interest to me, nothing at all, except there was some guy who was speaking about Buddhism, and I thought I would join his workshop and just make a nuisance of myself and amuse myself in that way. So I questioned everything he said. And at the end of the lecture, I went and, the workshop, I mean, at the end of his um, his talk, which introduced the workshop, I went up to him and said, "That was fascinating. Where do I find out more about Buddhism?" And he was astonished and said, "I thought you were dead set against it." And I said, "Well, I just asked a lot of questions and you came up with the right answers to everything I asked. So I'm interested in learning more now." So that was my first exposure to it. And he pointed me at the Buddhist Society of the United Kingdom at 58 Eccleston Square in London. I went along there every time I visited London, which wasn't often, but um, it was something which I did every time. And I picked up lots of free pamphlets. And when about 3 years later, I moved up to London, I enrolled in a class on Zen Buddhism and was which was taught by a wonderful woman called Irmgard Schlögl. which is quite a splendid name for anyone. I think it's whether Buddhist or not. Irmgard Schlegel is a tremendous name. Anyway, I was living with a friend who was he was an engineer on analog computers. Analog computers is something which we never hear of these days. It's all digital computers now. But he worked for British. I was going to say British Airways, but it was actually BOAC, the an earlier incarnation of British Airways, on their the pilot training equipment. And he had a colleague who lived on the same street in a suburb of London, a little village just outside London, in fact. And his friend was passionate about rummage sales, what we call jumble sales, and would hit about 6 of them in rapid succession on a Saturday morning, grabbing all the good stuff. And on one occasion, he came back with a purva, a kind of a brass peg, which had it has a 3-sided point, and at the other end there were 3 faces surmounted by a horse's head, and in the middle there was a vajra, and which is a representation of a thunderbolt. I knew nothing of any of this at the time. He would regularly come back to our place to show off his finds, and said to me, "Here, Mike, what do you think this is?" "I think it's Mexican." And I said, "No, it's Tibetan." And he said, "Nah, I think it's Mexican. I think it's some fake Aztec tourist thing." And I said, "No, I've got a picture of one in a book. I'll show you." And I run up to my room and came back with this book. I showed him the picture, and he looked at the picture, looked at the object, looked at the picture, and said, "Oh, yeah, right. Well, you can have it then if you're interested." And I said, "Oh, surely not. I can't afford that." And he said, "No, it only cost me 2 pennies, that is." And so now I was lumbered with this object, which I had to find out about. I took it with me up to the Buddhist Society and showed it to them and said, "Do you have any books, excuse me, any books which will explain what this is?" Because the caption of the picture in the book that I had, which I had borrowed from the Buddhist Society library, and just said Tibetan ritual object. And so I asked Pat Wilkinson, who was the librarian at the Buddhist Society, what it was. And she said, "No, you've read both our books on Tibetan Buddhism. This was 1966, you understand. There were very, very few books on Tibetan Buddhism." And she said, "But I'll tell you what, there is a Tibetan monk who has just arrived in London. He is exiled from Tibet, maybe he would be able to help you. And so she called him up, rang him up on the phone right there and then, and explained matters to him. And I was speaking with him within the hour. He was staying at the International Students Hostel in Bloomsbury, and I just hopped on the tube and went over there, and he answered the door, made me a cup of tea. We chatted, and he told me it was a purva, and the Sanskrit for it was Vajrakila, and he explained various things about it. I stayed there for about 2 hours chatting to him and said, "Do you mind if I come back next week?" And he said, "No, you can come back, however many times you like." And I saw him every week for about an entire day. Every Friday I would spend with him for the next 7 or 8 years. And after 3 years, I took refuge, that is, went through the ritual of becoming a Buddhist. And 20 odd years later, I was ordained as a lama. So that's my history of Buddhism. Well,
yeah, condensed.
A condensed history, yeah. And at the same time, I had come into contact with LSD and was fascinated with these psychedelic substances. When I first encountered LSD, it was still legal. However, the Buddhist Society of the United Kingdom had a rule that if you had taken LSD, you were debarred from joining the Buddhist Society. They had accepted Alan Watts as a member. I think he joined in the 1930s and was a frequent visitor and speaker at the Buddhist Society. But when he published his book, The Joyous Cosmology, which explained how LSD worked and what it did and so on, they were shocked and outraged by this, and had this panicked meeting where they decided to bar anyone who had even tasted the substance. And so I gradually weaned myself away from the Buddhist Society, and anyway, I had my own teacher at that point. And so whereas I thought I was going to become a Zen Buddhist, I actually became a Tibetan Buddhist and eventually a Lama of the Kagyud lineage. I've continued my exploration of psychedelics, and I am currently just polishing off a book. That is to say, I'm writing it, not reading it, on psychedelic Buddhism and how to use psychedelics in Buddhism and so on. So there's my condensed history of psychedelics too.
Yeah. So it's my understanding that at that time in the UK and in the US, it was mostly Zen Buddhism that was being taught and practiced. Is that correct?
And Theravada, yes. And what we would call the Shravakayana, what is sometimes disparagingly called the Hinayana, the lesser vehicle.
Hmm.
And so that was basically all the Buddhism that there was in the West, was the Theravada and Zen. And you were basically one or the other. So that does explain why I'd plumped for Zen, as it seemed more philosophically satisfying to me than Theravada was.
Hmm. And what was it when you encountered the Tibetan Buddhism through this teacher? What was it about it that sparked your interest enough so that you would continue to go back every week for 7 or 8 years?
Well, I actually, to clarify, I've remained his student until the present day. He is still alive. He'll be 80 this year. He was only 8 years older than me, so what was so attractive to me was that he had a living connection to Buddhism. He'd grown up in a monastery. He was an incarnate lama, the very, very first time I got to see him, he taught me a meditation, which worked much more effectively than the other meditations I'd learned from both Theravada and from Zen. And it may have been his presence while we were meditating. This is something which is it's been commented on, that there does seem to be an effect of experienced meditators, that if you're meditating in their presence, they emanate calmness and clarity in a way that you wouldn't get otherwise. So basically, it was that I was getting a much more vivid transmission of the lineage from him. I was getting a live example of the teachings, and so it was also one-on-one. In fact, he didn't have any other students for many years after this. It was about 5 years before he got another student, and so I must say it wasn't easy. I had studied with him for about 3 years as a friend and as just a casual acquaintance, and we were good friends. We went to the movies together. We did secular things together, and then when I said I would like to take refuge, he sprang to his feet, left the room, and came back with 8 sheets of paper and said, "Right, learn this and come back." And I looked at it, and it was Pali. It was in the Roman alphabet, but it was in Pali, a language I'd never studied. And I was like quietly boggling at this, thinking, "Oh my God, I've got to learn this." And he said to me, "Well, what are you waiting for? Leave, go home, learn it, come back when you've learned it." And so I did. I went home, I learned it, and I came back and said, "Right, I've learned it." Well, and he actually, I came back, and he wasn't there. He'd gone to Scotland, gone to Samueling with his childhood friend Trungpa. Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche. Trungpa founded this meditation center in Scotland with Akong Rinpoche. And my teacher had gone to stay with him. And so I came back the week after, and he was staying in someone's flat at the time. And he said to them, within my hearing, I could see him. He was standing there, and he said to these people, "Oh, tell him I'm too busy this week." and so I came back a third time, and he invited me in, made me a cup of tea. We sat down, we were drinking tea and chanting. And I said, "What about this refuge stuff?" And he said, "When do you want to do that?" And I said, "Now." And he said, "Good." And then we did it. So he freely admitted later that these were all tests. This was all testing for me, that he was just checking up to see whether I was the suitable material.
Right. See if you'd stick around. Now,
Yeah.
I wonder if I could circle back to that first meditation that you did with him.
Uh-huh.
What do you mean when you say that it worked?
Oh, it produced a calm and clear state, a state of samadhi, if you like.
And how is it different than what you'd experienced in the Zen or Theravada tradition?
Well, the Theravada meditations were basically observe the breaths and count them. When you breathe out, count 1. When you breathe in, think in. When you breathe out, count 2. When you breathe in, think in. And you continue this to some small number like 5 or 10, and start again at 1.
Right. Your mind wanders and then you start back at 1.
Exactly. And in Zen Buddhism, it was basically observing the mind or sometimes observing the breath or whatever. But neither of these seemed to actually work. He gave me a meditation, which was, when you breathe out, imagine the sound Om. When you breathe in, imagine the sound Ah. When you breathe out again, imagine Hri. Sorry, when you breathe out again, you imagine the sound Hong. And then when you breathe in, imagine the sound Hri. Well, this was a shamatha meditation from the tantric system called Mahamudra, which I didn't know at the time. But for whatever reason, it seemed to work. It seemed to produce this state of calmness and clarity.
Mm-hmm. So working
Curiously,
with mantra.
yeah, and strangely enough, I asked him about Vajrayana and asked him what he could tell me about it. And I said, I've heard there's Hinayana and there's Mahayana, but there's also something called Vajrayana, which I've read about in connection with Tibet. And he says, it's called the Vajrayanas? No, I'm sorry, I've never heard of it. Never heard of it. He taught me a Vajrayana meditation, and he was claiming that he'd never heard of it. He was actually preserving his vows of not divulging knowledge of the Vajrayana to someone who was not prepared for it, which is not done these days. By any teacher that I've ever heard of, who's, they'll say, oh yes, Vajrayana, come along next Wednesday, we're having an initiation, and then we'll no, he didn't do any of that. He fully observed the vows, which are they seal a Vajrayana initiation. You take 14 vows, and one of them is not to reveal any of this. And the very first part of a Vajrayana initiation is that you're given a sip of water to drink, and you're told, if you ever reveal this, or you ever reveal any details of the initiation, this water will turn to red hot iron and will burn you from the inside. So I have always observed the secrecy of initiations myself, and not mentioned any of the clues about mushrooms, which are given in various initiations. Even in my book, Secret Drugs of Buddhism, I have collected evidence from all the other printed books on the subject of, well, not necessarily on the subject of drugs, but I have pointed out the way in which amrita is used, and the way it's spoken of, and so on. But I have not revealed any of the teachings that I've learned in initiations. But there is plenty of other stuff about psychedelics and psychedelic substances, mainly psilocybe cubensis, in Vajrayana. Some things in Mahayana too, but it's basically in Vajrayana. Vajrayana seems to be Mahayana with psychedelics, that it's Mahayana fueled by amrita.
So you've got this foundation in the Buddhist practice now, and then you start to experiment with LSD at some point. So were you already interested in the secret drugs of Buddhism before you tried the LSD, or was that something that was triggered by the psychedelic experience?
Let me think. I think initially they were independent of each other. But then Tim Leary published the Psychedelic Experience, which was based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which of course is not its correct title. That was merely a publisher trying to cash in on the Egyptian Book of the Dead, of which had been a bestseller a few years earlier. I think it was published in 1927, and the Egyptian Book of the Dead had been published in 1924 or 25. And so he was merely trying to piggyback on the popularity of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and with all the hoopla and publicity that followed the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. It didn't seem to work, actually, apart from garnering the attention of Carl Jung and a few other people who wrote introductions to it. It's quite remarkable if you check out the original translation, that Carl Jung's introduction is actually much longer than the book itself. He spends a long time trying to convince people that of course, he understands all this. It can be explained entirely within his system, and so on and so forth. The person who published the book, Evans Wentz, also buried the name of the actual translator. He's mentioned very briefly in half a sentence in his introduction. He was a Sikkimese school teacher called Lama Kazi Dawa Samdup. Evans Wentz was a collector of curious foreign scripts. And when he was in northern India, he'd come across a copy of part of the Bardo Turtle, which is the Book of the Dead, and asked around if anyone could translate it. And the Kazi Dawa Samdup said yes, he could, and he translated it. But as it was what is classified as an Anuttara Yoga Tantra text, he described the Southern Buddha, which are known as, incorrectly, by the way, known as Dhyani Buddhas. They're Jina, which is another term for Buddha, means conqueror. But the person who originally wrote the word down, it was the English resident in Nepal in the 19th century, wrote down a description of the five Buddhas, and he heard Jina and wrote down Dhyani by mistake. And this has been reproduced by hundreds of writers attempting to explain these five Buddhas to the West and saying, oh, they're called Dhyani Buddhas. Dhyani doesn't exist in Sanskrit. There is no such word. However, this text, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, says, oh, there is the Southern Buddha is yellow with a yellow radiance. Western Buddha is red with a red radiance. Northern Buddha is green with a green radiance. But the central Buddha is blue with a white radiance, and the Eastern Buddha is white with a blue radiance. And he says this is obviously backwards. They've got this muddled up. So the central one must be white with a white radiance, and blue. The Eastern is blue with a blue radiance. There, I cleared it all up for you, and showing that he absolutely does not understand what the book is about, and that this. He was the first person to explain away the book, and added his own footnotes, which again they challenge the book itself in its length, and try and introduce theosophy to the book, and say, oh, no, you can't fall down into the lower realms. You have to be on a ladder, a progress of being reincarnate from animals to humans, humans to gods, and so on, and completely messed with the meaning.
So this was the original translator, not Carl Jung, right?
Oh yes, the original purveyor of this book to the West. This was Evans Wentz, not Samduk, the actual translator, who actually translated it correctly. But then Wentz went and tinkered with it and changed the text, and explained it away. Carl Jung came in later in the second edition, I think it was, and explained it even further, and diluted its message even more. The more modern translations are much better, and leave the text as it was. There is a very good translation which was done by Francesca Fremantle under the tutelage of Chodron Trumba. And then there's another one by Robert Thurman, which is more extensive and includes a lot more of the prayers and other ancillary writings around the Bardo Todor. Or the Book of the Dead that we had from Evans Wentz was just a one text, one core text. It wasn't the whole voluminous Terma, which was supposedly discovered in the 14th century. Another thing which occurs to me, which is somewhat suspect, is that Evans Wentz was originally just called Wentz. He added the Evans to give weight to his book on fairy faith in the Celtic lands. I think it was a title, something like that. He thought by adding a Welsh name to his own would give him more authority in the subject. But being Welsh myself, I'm not falling for that.
So it sounds like even when that text was first introduced to the West, it was already being changed and put through this puritanical or theosophist lens that like us putting that white figure in the middle, being a symbol for purity, and that must be what we're striving for or something. Right?
Yes, I think that was part of the a part of the whole process was that in the lower tantras, that is the way it's portrayed, with the central figure being Vajrayana Buddha, who is white with a white radiance. And only it changes in the Anuttara Yoga Tantra, the fourth phase of Tantra. There is an excellent book called the Tibetan Book of the Dead, a biography, I think that's what it's called, by Lopez, in which Professor Lopez explains all these various stages that it went through. And it's a very enlightening and amusing book, which I would recommend to everyone who is interested in the Book of the Dead.
Okay, so you encounter it through Leary's reinterpretation of it as psychedelic experience, right? So what happened to you when you encountered that text? Did you start to put some things together then?
I did, yes. I began to see the psychedelic experience through a Buddhist lens, if you like. But there was a particular event which occurred in which I was with various friends. We'd met at a house in the countryside next to a turkey farm, and we had intended to have an evening of cannabis intoxication. We had one of our friends had a prescription for cannabis tincture, which was something that you could get in those days in Britain, and was legally entitled to a bottle of cannabis tincture, a pint bottle, for, I believe it was either sixpence or a shilling, which is like a nickel or a dime for a pint of cannabis tincture, which was enough to knock out half of West London, basically. We each had a teaspoon of this tincture, and I thought I would prevent myself from collapsing into total somnolence by taking a third of a tab of something which is now known as orange sunshine, which was known to us just as sunshine. And I remember being just blown away by this. I was standing on the patio, looking towards the turkey farm next door, and I saw a cloud of tiny, brilliant dots in which were bright dots against the darkness that was, the sun had just gone down. And I said to my friend who was standing with me, "Oh, look at the fireflies." And he said, he just had cannabis, you see. And he said, "What fireflies?" And as he said, "What fireflies?" the dots joined up and like interwove and made a kind of rainbow across the sky. And I said, never mind, and went and sat down and listened to Bach on my friend's hi-fi system. And as I did, I closed my eyes And what appeared to my closed eyes was another 3 dimensions at right angles to our dimensions of space. It was like I was looking into another world, and this world was filled with an array of perfectly spherical crystal spheres. And not only did each of these spheres reflect every other sphere in the array, but somehow I could tell that they were only the reflection of the other spheres. That was their entire existence, was the reflection of the other spheres.
This is sounding familiar to me.
If you read the book, you'll remember this.
No, I haven't read the book yet, actually, but it sounds like Indra's Net.
It is.
Yeah,
It's exactly
like,
Indra's Net. Exactly, which I'd never heard of it at the time. It was a short while later that I wrote a book called The Buddhist Teaching of Totality by Garma C.C. Chang. And he explained the Avatamsaka Sutra and the system of the Avatamsaka school in China, which was known as the Keigon school in Japan, and the total interpenetration of all phenomena. And I read this book. I read the explanation which was made in China about 1,000 years earlier, and then there were excerpts from the Avatamsaka Sutra, which was even earlier, perhaps 1,000 years before that. And it occurred to me there were 2 ways of looking at this. Either psychedelics had allowed me to witness something which had normally only been vouched to advanced meditators, or these Buddhists who wrote the Avatamsaka Sutra and wrote about Indra's Net had access to psychedelics themselves. Either way, I saw this as a encouragement that I was on the right path, and perhaps I should practice both meditation and psychedelics, which I have done until this day.
Just I want to pause there for a second. After that experience, do you then go to your friend and teacher and talk to him about this?
Yes.
Yeah.
And he said, I know why you take drugs. It's because you're very smart.
He's like, you're on the right track.
Yeah, and that's all he would say. You're very, very smart. And meanwhile, his friend Trungpa had debunked and left for the United States. But before he left, he told my teacher that he was going to teach Vajrayana. But there was something about Vajrayana. There was one element of Vajrayana which he wasn't going to teach, because he knew how Westerners would abuse it. And I believe that this was psychedelics. I had met someone from the house where Trungpa lived. It was a hippie commune in Notting Hill. And Trungpa had taken LSD with them several times and criticized them for not taking it seriously enough and for not using it properly. I'd also seen Trungpa in the Buddhist society tell people to take LSD. He also told people in his commune, not everyone, but certain individuals, to stop taking LSD because they weren't treating it properly. And so I understood that there was a nuanced view of psychedelics, that they were not necessarily for everyone, and they were not to be trifled with.
When I asked my yoga teacher what he thought about working with psychedelics, because I had started to see the correlations and how psychedelics supported my yoga practice and the yoga practice supported my work with psychedelics, I started to put these things together on my own. And so I asked him about it, like what he thought about that. And he always said very directly that he felt that if you're going to do plant medicines or psychedelics, that you would need to do them in the context of a dedicated yoga practice of some kind.
I think that's probably true. Not necessarily yoga, hatha yoga, but within the framework of a system, a spiritual system, or a system of meditation, or something of that sort. In the Vajrayana, you are given amrita at the outset of an initiation, and in the past, this was always a truly psychedelic potion. And then you're also taught the visualization of a deity and the mantra of this deity. And after you've completed that initiation, you're entitled to attend Gana Chakras, that is tantric feasts, in which you again take the amrita and enjoy various edible delicacies and rich clothes and what have you, but you enjoy them without fully indulging yourself in it. You enjoy it from a reserved standpoint, from a meditative standpoint. I believe that the Vajrayana shows a way of using psychedelics in a way in which you are encouraged to pursue this this meditative practice, and to produce a meditative attitude to all experience, and to use all experience as part of your path. Your girlfriend left you, don't be upset. You can be upset if you like, but observe that state of mind, and watch how you are clinging to the idea of having a girlfriend. You might have won the lottery. Well, don't just enjoy the bliss of having, won millions of dollars. Observe that with detachment. Observe your glee and so on with detachment and with a certain amount of impersonal. I would say that yes, whatever happens to you, you can use it. You can examine your mind whenever something happens that you're either attracted to or repulsed by, or even something which you would tend to ignore. You can observe your mind and simply detach from it, and eventually produce a more even and if you like, a more enlightened point of view.
Right. So what you're describing is kind of like a conventional meditative practice of non-attachment, observing, being the witness, watching all arising experience from a more trying to be an objective point of view. So that's, I think that's a part of what's being promoted in the current psychedelic resurgence, is to have a mindfulness practice or a meditation practice. But what I don't hear emphasized is a meditation or yoga practice that's part of a lineage that has these other elements like visualization and mantra, which are so integral to Vajrayana and Hatha yoga or tantric yoga. And I'm wondering what you think that those added elements, what they offer the experience, because if it's all about non-attachment, then why bother with any of the visualizations, the deities,
Right.
the mantras?
Yes, I agree. The visualizations, and sometimes quite involved visualizations, you learn to you learn to manipulate your mind in one respect. You learn how to envision yourself as, for instance, Vajrayogini, or in the lower tantras, Manjushri or Avalokiteshvara or whatever, Tara maybe. In doing so, you can perform. These are all what are known as generation stage practices. The visualizations themselves are part of the generation stage of tantric meditation, and then in the completion stage, you practice things like breath control, and in Tibetan practice, there are the 6 yogas of Naropa, which initially started in the Kagyud and have spread to all the other lineages now. I was about to say it was purely Kagyud, but had to correct myself. So these practices like Tumo, which is the inner heat, and the illusory body and dream yoga and so on. These are all considered completion stage practices. And now, if we imagine that we sit down and perform the preliminaries for meditation, which is the refuges and the bodhisattva vow and so on. We generate feelings of love and compassion and sympathetic joy and equanimity. Then we generate ourselves as a deity and go through the visualizations, the mantra recitations, and then we dissolve the deity into a single syllable and then dissolve the syllable itself until you're left with nothingness. And we then sit in the nothingness for as long as you like, basically, but there are certain attitudes to be inculcated from the nothingness and from that practice, which give you a different perspective on the experience than can be achieved by mere by the Mahayana system of distancing yourself from your experience of just dispassionately watching your mind and so on. They can introduce you to the mind as a shining void, as the Book of the Dead calls it, to see the mind as not as a thing, but as a process which has certain properties, and it's being able to observe the mind itself, which is valuable in these practices. It's often the case that you will use a deity visualization practice, but in my own school, the Kagyud, there is a deity called Vajrayogini with no body, the bodiless form of Vajrayogini. There are 6 different bodied forms, right? Standing on one leg, standing on 2 legs, like flying through the sky, and so on. But there is, in fact, one practice in which she is visualized as having no body, and you visualize yourself as having no body. This can be extremely valuable to somebody who is fixated on deities with bodies, and the can only imagine a deity as being somebody that has, so many arms, so many heads, and what have you. To say, well, it hasn't got any of those. Now what do you do?
Yeah. Well, I've been immersed in study of depth psychology and Jung's work for the past few years, and it started to give me a different perspective on the yoga and shamanic experiences that I've had. And when you're describing this process, starting with the generation practices, I immediately start thinking, well, that's a way to start to awaken these archetypal energies and potentials within the person. So using the forms and the mantras, maybe postures or other practices. And then, so a way to access these archetypal energies within, but then culminating in this disidentification with the deity, with the form, with
Hmm.
probably that energy itself, which seems like a kind of a um, a safety control so that the person doesn't become overly identified and possessed by this archetypal energy and get inflated and think that they're the Vajra Yogini and all of that. So it seems like a really elegant and beautiful system for awakening, but then releasing or disidentifying or integrating it within your own structure.
I think integration is more the point here, as um, we are all enlightened. Um, it's just that we are all enlightened, and don't think it's just you.
Mm.
You must remember that every being in the universe has this same enlightenment, the same tathagata garba, the same inner core of their being is enlightenment. And it's just a method of reconnecting with that central core of Buddhahood. Um, however we can do that is good. But we must remember that it's not just us. It's not
Mm-hmm. Well,
just
and that power isn't mine.
absolutely, absolutely. Um, it's yeah, it's
It
just
is like the power.
right.
Yeah. So when did, in this whole journey, when did you start? I mean, did you ever start to mix the two practices? So you talked
Oh yeah.
about this experience you had at your friend's house, but you're like hanging out on the patio, looking at fireflies slash Indra's net, and then listening to Bach. But was there ever any point where you said, okay, I'm going to try doing some of these Vajrayana practices while high?
Absolutely. Totally. Almost immediately afterwards.
It was like there's this old commercial from when I was a kid, and it was for Reese's peanut butter cups. And someone's walking down the street eating a chocolate bar, and around the corner there's another person with a jar of peanut butter. I've never seen anyone do that, but there they were. And then they come around the corner and they smash into each other. And the person says, "You got peanut butter on my chocolate. You got chocolate on my peanut butter." And they go, "Whoa, this is amazing." So it sounds like there is this, like it was for me with the yoga and plant medicines. All of a sudden, there was this like coming together of these two paths that I'd been on and exploring. And all of a sudden, it was like,
Hmm.
oh, wow, like together now that's something special. So it's something similar for you?
Yeah, yeah, it was very, very much. And some years ago, it must be about, I think it was about 8 years ago now, I um, actually um, tried this with other people too. And we held a Ghana chakra using ayahuasca as the amrita.
Oh, wow.
And that was very successful in that. I would say it was very successful as far as the meditation was concerned. Um, I'm still not entirely happy with ayahuasca. It has far too much body load.
Yeah.
It produces tardive dyskinesia in myself, in that I simply cannot control my bodily movements. I can't sit up straight. I can't stand. If I needed to urinate, somebody would have to like um, walk me outside, like carry me practically outside. And
I wonder,
you know,
did you ever try it with like just a teaspoonful?
a teaspoonful of ayahuasca, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I have tried that, and that is um, that's interesting. It's just that to get to the spaces I wanted to achieve, it requires more ayahuasca than my body can take, it seems. I'm a bit of a hardhead when it comes to ayahuasca and to actually most tryptamines.
Hmm.
Um,
A hard head meaning that you need a lot to break
oh
through.
yes,
Oh,
I'm
and
sorry. This is Sasha Shulgin's terminology. I should have explained. Yes,
yeah, so you have to take enough to break through, but then you start to have all the unwanted bodily effects that disrupt the
exactly.
meditative practice. Yeah, yeah. So, what do you think? I mean, I think in your book you make the case for psilocybin mushrooms being a good contestant for the secret ingredient in amrita, right?
Right, right. Um, although there is a case to be made for using both Amanita muscaria and Psilocybe cubensis at the same time,
Hmm.
which produces a very profoundly calm and meditative state. And like you would use half as much of each as you would normally use. But they are a very, very productive, synergetic combination.
Hmm. Now, I mean, we kind of touched on this, but what do you think the psychedelic experience has to offer people who are really devoted to a yoga or uh, Buddhist practice? And what do you think? I mean, and vice versa too. So, because what I'm trying to do is understand the place of the psychedelics in the Vajrayana tradition and also in the yogic tradition. What I found in my study of this in terms of yoga is, and the theory that I have is that originally there was a substance called Soma that was used, or amrita. It's used kind of interchangeably in the old days.
Oh, in the Vedas, they use the terms interchangeably. Yes.
Yeah. So the kind of working theory that I've come up with is that back in the old days they used that and that helped to receive the downloads of all the knowledge, and then also they started to download practices, and so we see the emergence of hatha yoga practices, at which point the soma ritual becomes internalized and you're accessing the amrita in the mind, and it becomes like a symbolic ritual in the body. And then you kind of lose all use of substances aside from the Shivites who are using cannabis regularly, right? But in terms of like
Right.
the soma substance, they say, well, it just disappeared, or it's only for the gods. And I'm just wondering, like, if maybe that was an evolution, like we started with the psychedelics, and then we learned how to access these states or transformations through other practices, other means.
Well, I agree that it was that the practices came later than the substances. It seems to have begun with the substances. Although, in fact, you're probably aware of the so-called Pashupati figures in Indus Valley Seals, in which people or deities, we don't know what they are because we can't read their script yet, um, are seated in yogic postures. And on other seals, we see a straining mechanism with drops of liquid falling underneath, which Professor Mahadevan says is almost certainly a form of Soma. This would have been psilocybe, though, rather than amanita. Now, the so-called Deodar forest, in which Amanita muscaria was found, disappeared in historical times, and so even in the Vedas, they seem to have difficulty in getting hold of Amanita.
Well, we don't know it was Amanita in the Vedas.
We don't. But in the Yajur Veda, it speaks of the hundreds of rudras which are spread about the surface of the earth, and there are two kinds. There's the red rudras, which are known to the boys who tend. The red rudras are known to the girls who fetch water from the spring, and the blue-throated rudras are known to the boys who tend cattle. Now, the word for throat is very similar to the word for stem. And it seems to me this is just a simple word substitution, which they mean the blue-stemmed rudras, but are being a little coy with the wording. And so they seem to refer to two species of mushroom, and Amanita muscaria being the red form, and Psilocybe cubensis being the blue-stemmed or blue-throated form. But as the Soma, whatever it was, became more difficult to find, the commentaries, the Brahmanas, which were written much later than the Vedas, mention what substitutes you are supposed to use for Soma, and include the Soma lata, which is the Soma creeper or Soma vine, which personally I think was Argyria nervosa, the so-called Hawaiian baby woodrose, which is really an inaccurate name. It's not native to Hawaii, it's native to Eastern India, the eastern states of India, from Bengal south. And the Brahmanas also explain that the Soma dealer, the Soma seller, is a crook. The Soma dealer is a thief. It keeps repeating these imprecations against the Soma dealer, and actually tells you how to cheat him. It tells him, how you show him your best cow and then give him your worst cow. And if he complains, you are to beat him. And you're to beat him with this kind of stick. It should be a bamboo cane of this thickness, and it should have spots on it. Like, they go into great ritual detail on how you should beat up the Soma dealer and take his Soma.
I remember that. It's like, yeah, it should be like 1 angula thick or something like that. So it's like a thin rod.
Exactly. Yeah. and and so
But that's like kind of that's like robbing the drug dealer.
yes, I'd be amazed that they could ever get any deals out of him again. I mean, you're not going to trust you next time, brother. It's yeah.
You got to have a good relationship with your Soma dealer. Come on. Otherwise, yes, he may try to cheat you.
Yeah. And there is the problem, which is quite persistent. I remember reading about it in the Middle Way, the magazine of the Buddhist Society, back in 65, I think, which was what was the last meal of the Buddha, which was presented to him by the blacksmith named Chunda. We have a name for the meal that was prepared for the Buddha. It was called Sukhara Madhava. And this means pig's delight. Now, it could be a delightful dish of pork, or it'll be something which delights pigs. We really don't know, because this is what is known as hapax legomen, which means that it occurs only once in the language. And we've got no other reference to it at all. But if it is something which delights pigs, it could be mushrooms.
Mm-hmm.
And he could have been given something which was thought to be amrita, something which was thought to promote longevity. Anyway, he ate it all himself, and told the monks who were with him. He only had novices with him at the time, and said, "This is just for Tathagatas. It's not for novices. You shouldn't eat this. Only those who know how to deal with it should have this." Anyway, it didn't work, and he died.
Well,
and they buried the rest of it.
That would make sense. I mean, if they thought that these mushrooms gave the elixir of immortality, the amrita, then it would make sense. Okay, our teacher's dying. Let's give him a bunch of amrita, and hopefully he'll live.
Exactly.
And then Buddha has a trip and goes, okay, this isn't for novices. Whoa, like you need to be able to control your mind if you're going to do this stuff.
Exactly.
And he dies anyway.
Yeah.
He went out like Aldous Huxley.
Right. Well, it was actually a few days later, but it wasn't tripping when he left us.
Okay, so you've talked a lot about your investigation into what the substances are or what they could have been that are in the different tantras and all of that. Now, this new book where you're talking about putting it all into practice and integrating psychedelics into your Buddhist practices. I mean, what kind of detail are you getting into in terms of the practice? Does it go beyond basic mindfulness or awareness of the breath, that kind of thing?
Well, it's written in two parts. First part is psychedelics for Buddhists. The second part is Buddhism for psychonauts.
Mm-hmm. I like it.
And so I explain meditation from the point of view of somebody who's never meditated. And I do explain certain traditional techniques, like the four Brahma Viharas, the divine abodes, if you like. They're known as the four limitless states, and they have lots of different names, but they're basically love, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. And I give the ways in which these are generated, that you actually imagine all the beings in the universe surrounding you in a very pleasant park, and first of all, I should say, love is merely the wish for someone to be happy. If I wish you happiness, it means I love you. And so you, first of all, imagine how much better you would feel if you were happy. And so you conceive of the wish for happiness for yourself. Then you consider your family and friends and think how much better they would enjoy life if they were happy, and wish for their happiness. Then the people who are people you may know them by name, but not hang out with them. Maybe they're your colleagues at work, people who live in your apartment building,
Right.
whatever.
The circle starts to extend and extend,
Yep,
right?
exactly. And it goes all the way out to outer space, and to invisible beings and what have you. And so you do the same for each of the
Each of the
four
qualities.
limitless. You can then I follow that up with,
Well, let's pause.
well,
Let's
what happens if you develop attachment to someone?
Yeah, but
Illusion.
let's just pause at that practice, right?
Okay.
Because I've heard that similar practice described before, and I can see how doing that practice while under the influence of a psychedelic
Uh-huh.
would really help to actualize the practice and make it real for someone. So, first of all, the ability to imagine others, to really sense their presence with you,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of the sympathy that you're talking about, the ability to imagine someone else's experience, or to invoke the sense of happiness within yourself and being able to extend that to others, that would all be potentiated greatly by a lot of the psychedelics.
Absolutely. So that's an example um, of the use of psychedelics with the practice. Um, I also describe mandalas, and go into some detail of what we're actually seeing when we look at a mandala. What, that it's not often noticed that it's a three-dimensional view seen from above,
Mm-hmm.
basically drawn by someone who doesn't understand perspective. And Jung, when he read a chapter of a book on Buddhist mandalas, instantly.
The secret of the golden flower, I think, right?
Oh no, it
Yeah.
was.
Well, he talks about
Uh,
mandalas in there, and how a few things clicked for
ah,
him after reading that text, that the mandala was a symbol of wholeness and
right,
corresponded with his idea of the archetypal self.
right. That's right. Yeah, I I'm sorry, I was confusing it with what he actually read, which was Art and Yoga in Indian Civilization by Zimmer, an art historian called Zimmer. So he did not realize that these were not just two-dimensional diagrams, that they were actually descriptions of a three-dimensional construct, which in some initiations you are introduced to the mandala. Most initiations you're introduced to a mandala, but in some it's actually like a doll's house for a god. You know, it's
an actually constructed thing.
Building. Yes, it's a little building with little parasols and flags and things on the parapets and so on.
I've never seen a three-dimensional mandala like that. That sounds amazing.
They're usually kept under wraps, except for the initiations. They're not shown to the public.
So sorry, how do you explain a mandala in your book or to some of your students? How do you explain it?
Well, I first of all mentioned that there are several different kinds of mandalas, and go through the different kinds, like the Mahabhuta mandalas, which are
elements.
Mandalas of I'm sorry?
The elements.
Exactly. The mandalas of the elements, earth, air, fire, water, and ether, or space, or whatever. And then I get to the deity mandalas, which are revealed in an initiation, and I describe the protective circle of earth, water, and fire, which is around the outside, and the 8 Mahasmashanas, the great cemetery grounds, and then inside that there are the walls and gates of the mandala, and right at the center there are the deities. And I explain these and the meaning of the directions and so on. For instance, the deity of the East often represents the emotion of anger, and they can represent purified anger, which is the mirror-like wisdom. Anger offers us an example of feeling very sharp, very focused, very and very, very clear, like a mirror. But if we don't attach ourselves to the, excuse me,
What does a Buddhist say after he sneezed? You don't say God bless.
We don't. In fact, a friend of mine pointed out that we don't mean God bless you. We might as well be just saying you sneezed.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think Buddhists say anything at all, apart from like maybe saying, "Oh, you sneezed," you know.
I say spontaneous pranayama.
Yes, yes.
It's a kriya, the kriya of sneezing.
It's sometimes said to be one of the bardos
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Because you disappear in that moment you sneeze, you're gone, right?
exactly,
Wow, I never thought of
exactly.
that. Amazing. So they recognize that.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Sex is another one.
Right.
And orgasm, that is. Orgasm is a bardo. Sneezing is a bardo.
Yeah,
You know.
le petit mort, the little death.
Yeah, la petite.
Oh, la petite. Oh,
La
this is
petite
feminine.
mort.
Ah,
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
excuse,
Otherwise, you're saying the little dead man.
excusez-moi. Well, it's a little dead man after the little death.
Yeah.
Soldier falls down. Anyway. So describing these mandalas, so are you encouraging people to work with the mandala visualizations with
Um,
under the psychedelics?
that's really up to them. If they've had the appropriate initiations, yes, they can. I do point this stuff out.
That's what I was going to ask. Like when you're sharing stuff like that, do you not think it's important to have the guidance of a teacher? Because, like you said, your teacher decides, like, I don't think you're quite ready for this, or they keep the sheet over the
Absolutely.
3D mandala dollhouse, until you're kind of ready, or you've gone through the proper initiation and showed the dedication,
Right.
all of that, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, come. Oh. By the way, I didn't finish that story about learning the 8 pages of Pali when he eventually said,
Well, I was
"Yes,
going to
oh,
ask you
okay,
about that. Yeah, I was going to
we
ask.
didn't use it at all. We didn't
We,
use one word from that 8 pages. It was
oh,
just a test.
well, I was going to ask, when you say learn, does that mean you just learned how to say it
Memorized it.
phonetically, or
Uh-huh.
did you actually do the translation and know what you were saying?
No, no,
Okay.
I didn't. I just learned it phonetically.
Wow.
And so otherwise, I'd have had to learn Pali, which I probably would have done, but it was a bit much at the time.
Well, the big joke was that that was just a bunch of his mother's favorite recipes that he took with him.
Yeah,
There's nothing spiritual about it at all.
it could be. Yeah.
He was counting on you not translating it.
Well,
Um,
I've also I've come to a point where I've I'm um, I've described a couple of pranayama, or in Tibetan it's called tsalung, practices, and I've stopped short of the practice of Dumo, which is the inner heat, and I'm not sure whether I should teach that. It's available in books. So it's no longer secret, but should I include it in this work at all? And so I've described vase breathing,
what's that?
which is it's very deep breathing and holding your breath, and
Oh, that's interesting. You call it so in Hatha Yoga we call it kumbhaka, which means
yeah,
full,
that's right.
full like
Kumbhaka, same thing.
yeah, because it means full like a pot. So you fill yourself up and you hold it and you contain.
Yeah, that's exactly the same thing.
Okay,
Yes.
cool.
But I do not describe how the breaths are supposed to go from the left and right channels into the central channel.
Shh, wait, you're giving away the secrets right now. My God. Yeah.
Well, I haven't described it. I don't describe how that's done, how that's performed. So, I mean, I could, I suppose, as it's described in a number of different books.
But don't you think that, like, if someone's just getting an introduction through a book, they're at a very beginner stage, and so their only like beginner practices are going to be, even accessible to them, really, because they still got to like to be able to do like the full kumbhaka with visualizations and all of that energetic movement and everything. You've got to have a lot of control over your attention.
Right, that's true. But I have considered that I may be teaching people who have already embarked on the path, and they may be at various different stages and not just all beginners.
Mm.
I've even included some like divination practices, which would be, applicable to all, apart from the tantric magical homas, the fire rituals, which have different hearths and so on. And those I have described in very sketchy and hopefully tantalizing ways, so that people, will investigate the tantras. Although I've told the reader that it's not appropriate to pursue the path with the hope of developing magical abilities, because you will lose the magical abilities as soon as you start that. It's quite possible to develop such things as clairvoyance and prescient dreams and so on, if you do develop calm abiding meditation, will produce prescient dreams and so on.
Mm.
But it's not appropriate to pursue those paths purely so that you'll get the riddhis and siddhis that are normally part of the path. In fact, I do quote a little piece of advice from the I think it's from the Visuddhimagga, which says that it is possible to produce the siddhi of being in two places at once. But if you are capable of doing this, please don't, because it confuses the hell out of people.
Yeah. Just ask anybody who's been on Zoom for the past year and a half. It totally messes with your sense of time and space and equilibrium for sure. Well, you know what I found? Like when you're actually doing practices that incorporate all these elements, and there's so much correspondence between Tantric Hatha Yoga and the Vajrayana Tibetan practices for sure. Like they would, the old thing is, well, the Buddhist was a yogi. Like a lot of this stuff migrated over and was incorporated. I think when you're doing the practices where you're doing visualizations, along with the breathing and embodiment practices and mantra, like it's all really utilizing your imagination to a fuller capacity than what normal people are doing these days. Like we're just inundated with so many images from the outside that I think people's imaginations have kind of shriveled and dried up to a large extent. But when you start stoking the imagination up in that way, I find that just a natural byproduct of that is a really heightened intuitive sense that almost at times feels like extra sensory perception. It really does feel like a siddhi. My wife jokes about it all the time. Like I'm always predicting numbers or what someone in a movie is going to say next or something. Like it's kind of amusing and fun. But it just seems to be a natural byproduct of these practices, like without striving for anything. It just happens.
That's true. Yeah, I restrict the amount of input from media these days. I don't have a television. If I sit down at the computer, I'm usually writing whatever I Well, it's a I don't usually like sit back and let myself be bombarded by somebody else's ideas.
Yeah.
Um,
Who wants, like, I do all this work to empty out my mind, and then do I want to just fill it up with somebody else's crap? No way. It's like here in Canada, you got to take your shoes off at the door. You don't come tromping in with your shoes into my living room. I'm very careful
quite
about
so,
that.
quite so.
Well, I'm wondering, Mike, I think, this has been a really great conversation. And I guess the question that's just still hanging there for me is, what is your goal in sharing all of this stuff? And now, like, even getting into sharing practices. I'm sure you're ruffling some feathers in the Buddhism world, but what's your goal? Like, what drives you to put all this out there?
Um, well, it's to let people know that there is more. There is more than just using psychedelics. So there's more than just sitting in meditation. And to a certain extent, I want to tell Buddhists that there's nothing holy or sacrosanct about meditation itself. It was just the way that was available to most people at the time. Um, even in Tibet, it's there
Right.
are
Like you're up in the mountains. There's not a lot of plants around. There's probably not
that's true.
there's not psychedelic plants around. So you ferment some yak's milk, you do some crazy breathing practices because people want to get into these altered states. I mean, it's just
Yep.
part of human nature.
Yes. But I would say that there is there are termas, um, which are discovered texts, like treasure texts, buried treasures, and these have been turned up since the 12th century. And some termas are actually pots of pills, and some are. I mean, there are termas that say there are various ways to enlightenment. There's um, enlightenment by hearing, which is like the Bardo Turdal Book of the Dead. Enlightenment by wearing talismans, enlightenment by tasting, enlightenment by thinking. Oh, it's wait a minute, back up. Tell me about that tasting thing. What's that? And this is amrita. They are talking about amrita, and there is in fact one part of Tibet which is a low level jungly area called Munyul. Munyul is near the borders of Bhutan, and it's said to have several secret lands hidden there, like Pemako, and there is um, a guide to Pemako, which was written a few hundred years ago, which describes all the plants there, which can enlighten one. If you eat this plant, you get this enlightenment. If you eat this plant, you get this other enlightenment. So it's been there all the while, and so this is my intent, is to tell people that meditation is fine. Keep it up, but it's not the only way, and it's not the only, you know, um,
It's not some better way, more holy way, more pure way. It's just another way.
it's exactly that. And also for people who are taking psychedelics, and I'd like to tell them it's not the only way. There is also meditation. There's also, just the practice of looking at your mind while you're tripping. It's a bit like going to the cinema or watching television and not realizing that you're looking at a screen the entire time. Like you may see a thriller, a romantic comedy, a cartoon, without realizing that it's all appearing on the same screen. Like, pay attention, there's a screen behind it all.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the teachings I would like to spread. If people are, any of your viewers are interested, I have an organization called Amrita Dzong. It's actually the identical name to my own teachers organization in the UK, and this is the United States version of it. It includes Canada too, because in 1989 he gave me responsibility for teaching all of his North American students. So if anybody would like to find out about my teachings or whatever, it's amritadzong.com, amritadzong.com. And so we occasionally have retreats here I have a 20-acre farm in the middle of the Shasta Trinity National Forest. And
that's in Northern California?
Yes, Northern California, just 52 miles southwest of Mount Shasta. And if people would like to contact me, there's means of doing that on the website amritadzong.com.
You also do some events with my friend Eric Davis through the San Francisco Psychedelic Society. Is that right?
I have done, yes. Yes, I'm ever since the Psychedelic Sangha started, I've been co-opted onto the advisory board, and I'm still waiting to be asked for advice. I've not advised anyone so far.
Well, let me extend that, on behalf of the people listening and watching, if someone wants to get into this and they want to go beyond the meditation app, where's the place that you would recommend they start? Is it finding a local teacher, or do you think it's just as powerful to work with someone like you over Zoom or however else you might be doing it? What's the next step for that person who's got a little taste of something and they want to really dedicate themselves to a real lifelong practice?
Well, I think either connect with a local teacher, find a school which appeals to them. I mean, not necessarily a school of meditation or whatever. I mean, a lineage of teachings, or contact me. I have a very low level of teaching at the moment. I have local meditation classes, which I do once a week on Friday evenings. But apart from Friday evenings, I'm free most of the time.
That's cool. So, hey, everybody, there's a seasoned teacher here who's gone deep into both a lineage-based meditation practice and ritual practice and psychedelics. And he's saying right now, I'm underutilized. What a golden opportunity. What does your teacher think about you being so open in public about the psychedelics and Buddhism, and even sharing some of those Buddhist practices that were kept under wraps?
Um,
You ever check in with him and go, "Hey, are you okay with me putting this book out?"
I, 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 I don't think he even knows that I had a book, that I've actually written a book, or that I'm writing one now. I saw him, let me see, 2 or 3 years ago. And that was the last I saw him. Um, and he gave me his blessing when I saw him. Uh, it was a very amicable meeting. But I don't think he knew about the book. But
That suggests to me that maybe you were hiding it from him. You're withholding.
oh no, no, it was at a funeral, so I didn't
Oh,
get
okay.
to to mention anything in full. Um, I should I should send him a copy though. He'd probably enjoy it. He doesn't read much English. He doesn't speak much English, but um, he'd probably give it away. You know, everything that people give him, he gives away in the next few days. You know, somebody in Australia gives him a gold statue. The next week, one of his students gets a gold statue. It's
Hmm. Before we go, I heard something on an interview that you did a while back that I just absolutely loved. You were talking about an early teacher. I'm not sure if it was a teacher of yours, but they were asked by a Western student to summarize, I think, Zen or Buddhism in general.
oh,
And
it was Dzogchen.
can
I
you
know what you're going to say.
can you just tell this, because I love it to my core.
Oh, and it was in the 1970s in Kathmandu when a teacher, a Tibetan monk, was teaching Dzogchen. And they always teach the most difficult things first with Dzogchen, just in case someone that just gets it and doesn't need anything more. But with this, it was a 6 week course. And after 2 weeks of it, people were scratching their heads and arguing. And they went to the teacher and said, look, we're very confused about this. People have got different ideas about it. Um, could you just sum it up in 2 sentences? And he stopped and he thought for a while and he said, right, first sentence, don't believe your own bullshit. Second sentence, enjoy the view.
That's so perfect. You know,
I love that myself.
when I talk about the Yoga Sutra, like Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, it can be very hard for people to grasp or get into it. It took me a couple teachers to be able to start to understand it, and then over the years of practicing, you know, I think you get a deeper understanding of things where you can start to interpret. And I would, you know, people ask like, well, what is the goal of yoga? And I would basically summarize Patanjali's teaching as stop taking yourself so fucking seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, we can go into detail on that, like how you go about doing that. But basically, at the end of the day, is that's why you're suffering, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I really appreciate your approach. I could tell, you know, you've been cooked long enough to have a sense of humor about it all and not take all of this too seriously.
Quite. I'm like, I surprise myself sometimes. My car, which has been perfect up till now, just died last week, just
Oh,
completely flat out died. Clouds of smoke coming from under the hood, and I took it to be repaired, and they said, "No, can't do a thing with it. It's fucked." And and I was remarkably insouciant about it. Oh well, it's only a car, and have to get another one now. And that's no, look, you're
oh,
on
cutie.
television. Look. So yeah, it's my cat. I found him when he was just born, um, and he was on my porch, on my deck. I came home and found him with his eyes and ears closed. He was still wet from being
Wow.
born. He still had his umbilical cord attached, and he was like crawling around and round in circles. And there were like, I think, three other cats looking at him, going, "What the hell is that?" And so I brought him up ever since. Um, and he is my constant companion. He's like, whatever I'm doing, he'll be doing it with me.
I've got an animal familiar too, and I've learned so much from my dog friend. Probably more than any human teacher, to be honest.
Yep, they've got that naturalness that we strive for.
Well, it's so funny. I mentioned that story about Ram Dass meeting Neem Karoli Baba for the first time and it being so profound for him because it was the first time I was ever with anyone who accepted me completely for who I am and all that. I said, dude, haven't you
Yeah.
ever lived with a dog?
Yep, that's exactly right.
Okay, maybe to wrap up, I have to ask you this. As someone who is further down the road than I am, I would love to hear from you, after 50 years of practice or however long it's been, what has the dedication to a lineage-based practice, what has it given you in your life that you suspect maybe other people aren't receiving as they kind of do the magpie practice of just picking up things here or there? Like that kind of dedication, it's a real commitment. And I'm wondering what you think is the benefit that you've received from that that's unique.
Hmm. I think it's the wisdom of the ages. I think is one way of putting it. The 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 laughter which seems to permeate the lineage. Um, the being soaked in the the wisdom of centuries and still not taking it seriously, still not being so completely po-faced about it. And whenever I see my teacher, he is always smiling, always. And uh, so it's yeah, it's just that. I think just that um, we can be wise, but part of that wisdom is also um, to see the funny side of things.
Yeah, it might even be an indicator of real understanding and wisdom.
Yeah, could be, could be. I think it probably is.
Yeah. And when you're describing that, like, the lineage has been going on so long, and yet they still retain this sense of humor. I wonder if the sense of humor is because it's been going on so long. like with somebody new to a practice, there tends to be this like real sincerity, and a real seriousness and preciousness about it, you know. And somebody that's been doing it a long time, you can tell it just seems like really naturalized with them. They're not precious about it. They can laugh about it and themselves, and their lack of full integration or enlightenment. So it seems to actually to go hand in hand with the duration, like a fine wine aging. Things have consolidated and found a richness and a depth of a flavor, that you don't get with. It takes time. I think it takes
Uh-huh.
time, and it takes dedication in order to spend that amount of time steeped in something. You got to pick a path and to receive the full benefits, I think.
I believe you're right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, just to say, I'm always trying to encourage people to find a path that resonates with them, that they're attracted to, and just stick with it. Like, give it 6 months, just as a personal experiment, just to see, because I think that there's a real benefit in that. It gives a kind of clarity and direction to your practice and a structure to it that you don't otherwise have, and can leave you feeling kind of lost or discombobulated or confused by all the conflicting information that you're receiving. So my suggestion is always find, first of all, a teacher who you like, that you admire some
Hmm.
qualities about. Because, if they've got something that you admire, well, maybe their practice has something to do with that, and
Right.
then really dedicate yourself to following that path as just like a personal experiment, just find out for yourself.
In the new book, I've actually included um, some tests for a teacher. How you can, if you find a teacher, meditate with him, sit with him a few times, and
That's great. Yeah.
just you know look out for warning signs. Like if he charges money for teachings, then he may not be the one for you. He's not the one for me. Certainly, I don't charge for teachings. If you want to donate something, that's fine.
Yeah.
But if he gives himself fancy titles, if he's not known by other members of the lineage that he purports to belong to, these are warning signs. But
How about drink ayahuasca with them?
yeah, well, that's a good one. Yes, uh, I actually included something like that. I say ask him about psychedelics, and if he's cool with it, then that's fine, because the better teachers are cool with it. I remember there was a teacher I read of once in the early 70s, I think it was, who said that his students should stay away from LSD because LSD will put your practice back 19 lifetimes. And I want to know how the hell he could know that, seeing as LSD hasn't been around for 19 lifetimes yet. It's
Yeah.
not like, even now, it's not been around for 19 lifetimes. It's like 25,
It's like 3 generations,
like
basically.
three generations so far. So that's only generations too, not lifetimes. So, uh, oh well.
Yeah.
Um,
I'd say beware of anybody who speaks with that kind of finality and self-assuredness about something they don't know anything about. Stay away from them.
yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yes. So anybody who is certain and positive about anything. Um, my teacher always advised people against forming opinions,
Yeah.
any opinions.
Yeah. Or it's okay to have opinions or preferences, but hold them actually really lightly, because the opinion you hold today may want to be a different opinion tomorrow.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like we can't just be in non-attached witnessing all the time. Like we want to like lose ourselves in the movie of life every once in a while, right? But we got to know that there's another option too.
Yes.
We
Yes.
can step out of the movie if we
We can
choose.
go into the foyer and buy an ice cream. Yeah.
Yeah, enjoy the view and enjoy the ice cream sandwich. Well, Mike, this has been really great. I'm glad our friends put us together, because I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you and listening to your stories, and your journey has been really fun.
Well, thank you very much. And um, check out amritadzong.com and yeah, I'd be interested to know what you think of it, and because I've only just recently started the website,
Yeah.
and if you think there's anything which should be added to it, I was thinking that it should also include a schedule, which I don't have as part of it yet, but could easily do.
Yeah, man, get some events up there.
Yeah, yeah. I've got a couple of retreats planned for later in the year,
Oh,
but
great.
it's um, so if any of your viewers would care to come here for a retreat, I would say bring a tent and a sleeping bag, and I'll try to keep you amused. Uh,
Now, when you do the retreats, I don't know if you can say this publicly, but do you use psychedelics on the retreats?
I have done. I have done in the past. I can say this now because California is in the process of legalizing all psychedelics.
Oh, wow. Great.
Yeah, passed three committees, and it's just got to go for the governor's signature now.
That's amazing. Yeah. Excellent.
And it's basically anything except mescaline, which has been extracted from peyote, because peyote is endangered.
Wow.
Synthetic mescaline is fine.
Hmm. Okay. That's actually quite responsible.
Isn't it? It was a friend of mine who got that included.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, come along and we'll do some initiations and hand out amrita to everyone.
Yeah. And you can stop believing your own bullshit and just enjoy the view.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like, don't believe your own bullshit, and especially don't believe mine.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Mike. I appreciate that. All right, mate.
All
Well,
right.
take care. We'll see you down the road, I hope.
Okay. Well, uh, yeah, I guess I will. Bye bye now.
Bye bye.